The city seemed to glitter with Rodrigo's triumph that day. Every detail of the wedding had been polished, rehearsed, and perfected. The flowers blooming in ordered rows, the ivory ribbons swaying gently in the warm air, the guests pressing into their seats in silken colors. Photographers milled about as if they were documenting the crowning moment of a king. And that's how Rodrigo liked it. Today was meant to be his coronation, his chance to show everyone that he had moved on, upgraded, and elevated above the wreckage of his past marriage. He stood tall at the altar, chest puffed with the pride of a man who believed he had beaten life at its own game. His gaze locked on Letitia, his young bride, as she glided slowly down the aisle. She was radiant, her smile dazzling with the fresh sheen of youth and adoration. Each step she took toward him was a step into his carefully woven illusion that he had won it all. Status, beauty, power, and a brand new beginning. The music hummed through the air like honey. Guests sighed, melted, admiring the perfect fabric of the event. Rodrigo drank it in like wine. Finally, he thought. Finally, they would see him as he deserved to be seen. No one would be thinking of that other woman. Clara, or so he told himself. Behind the mask of a confident groom, discomfort clawed inside him. It worked like an itch he couldn't quite scratch, a hollow sensation pressing into his ribs. The hall was perfect, Letitia flawless, the ceremony as pristine as the silk draped across the pews. Yet there it remained, that intrusive weight, the ghost of choices, the whisper of a past he thought firmly buried. He brushed it away. Nothing will ruin my day, he told himself, clenching a sense of defiance to silence the unease. And then it came. At first, only a low thrum in the distance, too faint to matter, too uncertain to notice. But it grew, louder, deeper. The music trembled beneath it. Guests tilted heads. Murmurs rustled the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Then, over the sky's edge, the shape appeared. Iron blades slicing the air, slicing the ceremony. A helicopter. The sound swallowed the silence whole. The rotors thundered until blooms shook in their vases and hair whipped like banners. The crowd rose in confusion, eyes stretched toward the sky, hands shielding faces from the gust. Rodrigo felt all the air leave his chest at once. For the first time that day, the confidence twisted into dread. Something was wrong. The helicopter descended, slow, deliberate, like destiny lowering itself onto Rodrigo's perfect stage. People gasped. The whispers spread like wildfire across the chairs. When the doors swung open, what stepped out was not what anyone expected. Children. 2 boys, identical, about 8 years old, with the sleek hair and untamed laughter of youth. The twins leapt down as if they belonged there, darting across the manicured lawn with carefree joy, their giggles sharper to Rodrigo's ears than thunder. He stared in disbelief, brain refusing to stitch together the image. 2 children, his eyes searched frantic for an answer. Whose? How? And then she appeared. Clara. She walked with that calmness he used to mock, a serenity that once made him call her naive, but now in this moment turned to steel. The woman he had betrayed, the woman he expected to arrive broken and humiliated, had chosen the most dramatic of entrances. Yet there was no hatred on her face, no venom in her eyes. She moved with the certainty of someone who no longer needed to fight battles against him. At her side, the twins ran freely, tethered not to the weight of his betrayal, but to her strength, the life she had built without him. The crowd froze. Every guest recognized the shift in air, the way time seemed to stretch and bend around her. Jaws parted, whispers tangled. Even Letitia faltered in her glide. Her smile, so carefully built, flickered when she looked at Clara, then at the children. For a breath, her expression carried something Rodrigo couldn't entirely read. Confusion, maybe dawning realization. But it was clear she understood something before he did. This wasn't about her wedding anymore. This wasn't about Rodrigo's crowning achievement. This was about Clara. For Rodrigo, the twins weren't innocent boys. They were daggers, reminders of what he had abandoned, of what had thrived without him. 2 lives he had no part of, 2 names he had never spoken, 2 joys he had forfeited to chase his pleasure and his pride. The earth seemed to lurch beneath his feet as if gravity itself mocked him. Clara advanced toward the altar, not fast, not slow, simply steady. She wore not revenge, not bitterness. Both would have been easier for Rodrigo. She carried dignity, and for Rodrigo, that was the cruelest wound of all. He wanted her broken, destroyed, groveling. He wanted her to prove his triumph. Instead, she stood taller than he remembered, her presence filling the ceremony more powerfully than the flowers, the lights, the bride herself. Letitia shifted at his side. Rodrigo felt her uncertainty ripple. saw her glance dart between him, Clara, and the twins. The glow she had worn turned brittle, the texture of a porcelain mask at risk of cracking. She knew before he did. This moment was bigger than vows. Rodrigo could not stop the flood of memory. He saw Clara as she once was when they met. Young, radiant but gentle, supportive in ways he had never earned, lifting him up even while he spoiled her loyalty. She had believed in him when he didn't even believe in himself, but arrogance rotted through him. The betrayal crept like rot in floorboards, at first small, then impossible to hide. He had belittled her, dismissed her, treated her love as though it would never leave. He thought she was a fixture, not a choice. When she discovered the betrayals, he expected rage, expected begging, expected her to claw her way back to him. But she did not. She gathered her own strength, sealed her silence, and walked away. No promises, no tears, no backward glance. At the time, he laughed it off, told himself she was nothing without him, that sooner or later she'd crawl back, desperate for what only he could give. He carried that belief for years, a seed of ego that made him certain his ex-wife was somewhere out there holding on to the pain, unable to heal. And now, standing before him in flesh, framed by his own wedding, she proved she had never needed him. Not then, not now, not ever. She had chosen herself, chosen her children, and built a life too far from his reach. The sting wasn't in anger. It was in clarity. Clara had bloomed into the woman she was always meant to be. A woman Rodrigo had so carelessly underestimated, discarded, and lost by his own hand. Every guest could see it in the way she walked, in the way she looked not at him, not at Letitia, not at the crowd, but ahead, free of them all. He felt stripped bare. His pride, his posturing, flaked away like old paint until all that remained were regrets he could not voice. The apologies that never left his lips. The love he took for granted, the children he didn't raise. At the altar, Rodrigo clenched his hands to keep from trembling. And still Clara walked forward, calm as a tide. Letitia's breath caught beside him. He felt her pull slightly from his arm. He dared not look, dared not address what he saw burning across faces in the room. Everyone knew. The ceremony no longer belonged to Rodrigo. It no longer belonged to Letitia. It belonged to Clara's presence, the very woman he thought he had crushed. And Rodrigo stood frozen at the altar, his bride at his side, while the weight of his own choices crashed like stone around him. But his mind couldn't escape the present. She wasn't challenging him, wasn't screaming her pain. She was simply there with the calm he had never imagined she would have. And that was the greatest blow of all. He thought about how empty he felt, how everything he had built over the years seemed pointless now. Clara Ara's children, whom he had never known, were there running around the ceremony as if nothing had happened. They were the reflection of everything he had lost. And Clara Ara, with her children by her side, with her dignity intact, showed him that no matter how hard he tried to hide it, she had not been defeated. She had never needed his permission to be happy. She'd moved on, and now all he wanted was to turn back time. But Clara Ara didn't care about that. She was there not to seek forgiveness, but to show that life went on with or without him. And Rodrigo knew in that moment that there was no going back. She was no longer the woman he had known. She was finally the woman he deserved to lose. Rodrigo tried to maintain his composure. He looked at Clara Ara, who was now calmly positioned among the guests with her twin sons by her side. All eyes were on her, but she didn't care. She wasn't seeking to be the center of attention. She wasn't there to cause a scandal. She was there because she had overcome everything he had done to her. And now she was simply living her truth. But for Rodrigo, it felt like humiliation. He felt as though he was being stripped of his position, his honor, as if everything he had built was being destroyed before his eyes. He, who had planned the perfect wedding, a moment to be admired, was now standing before the woman he had despised and betrayed, and more. She was there with the children. Two boys he didn't even know existed, but who somehow seemed to be the living image of everything he had lost. The helicopter had disappeared, but the echo of its sound still hung in the air, like a cruel reminder that he no longer controlled anything. The silence of the ceremony was momentarily broken by the laughter of the twins. They ran from one side to the other, innocent, joyful, without a care for the tension that hung over the adults. They were the living proof that Clara had moved on, that she had a life he never imagined she could build. Rodrigo looked at Letitia, his bride, and saw her expression. She was uncomfortable, but didn't know what to say. Letitia didn't fully understand the weight of the situation, but something in her eyes told him she was beginning to realize what was happening. She wasn't there to compete with Clara, but what was unfolding before her made her question what really mattered. It wasn't just the wedding, the dress, or the party. It was something deeper. something Rodrigo still couldn't understand with all his arrogance. He had planned this moment to feel superior. He wanted Clara to be the weak point of the ceremony, the one who would fail, the one who would cause some kind of disruption. He thought she would remain on the sidelines, that she would feel inferior. But the reality was different. Clara wasn't there to seek revenge. She wasn't there to be defeated or humiliated. She was there to be seen, to be admired for the strength with which she had moved on, to show that she didn't need his approval. She walked with a dignity Rodrigo never imagined possible. He who had considered her weak had watched her walk out of his life, and now he saw her again with such a strong presence that he couldn't ignore it. She was there not because she wanted to prove something to him, but because she had already proven to herself how much she was worth. Clara's revenge wasn't in her words or actions. Their revenge was in the fact that she was there, complete, independent, and no longer dependent on any man. She didn't need him. She didn't need him at all. The guests were silent, some whispering, others watching the scene with eyes full of curiosity. Rodrigo didn't know what to do. He couldn't hide the pain he felt anymore. The woman he had betrayed, the woman he had humiliated was now standing there stronger than ever. And he, with everything he had, couldn't hold himself up anymore. Clara looked directly at him without anger, without contempt, only with a calmness that made him feel small. She didn't say a word, but her eyes spoke more than any speech could. She was there because she had every right to be. She didn't need to hide anymore. She wasn't the woman he had left behind, a woman marked by pain and humiliation. She was someone different. She was someone he never imagined she would become. And for him, that was the greatest defeat of all. Rodrigo realized at that moment that he was responsible for his own downfall. He had wanted Clara to be a reflection of what he thought she was. Weak, humiliated, on the margins of society. But what he didn't know was that by letting her go, he had released the strongest and most dignified woman he had ever known. And now he had to face that. There was no more room for lies. There was no more room to deny the impact of his own choices. She was there to teach a silent lesson, a lesson that he and everyone else present would have to learn. Clara's power wasn't in revenge, but in her ability to move on, without looking back, without needing anyone's validation. And that for Rodrigo was the greatest surprise and humiliation of all. He found himself at that moment at rock bottom, while Clara with her children was at the top with a strength he had never known her to admire. Rodrigo never imagined that this day would come. He planned every detail of the ceremony with almost obsessive precision, and what he wanted most was for everything to go perfectly. Perfect in his eyes, of course. He wanted to be the center of attention, to have everyone see the man he had become, successful, admired, a man who had overcome all adversities and was now about to marry a beautiful woman who loved him. He wanted Clara, his ex-wife, to know once and for all that he was fine without her, that she was nothing more than a distant, irrelevant past. But deep down, there was something more. He knew that Clara hated him, knew that she saw him as the man who destroyed her, the man who humiliated her. He knew that somehow she still loved him, still cared, but he believed her life without him would be a failure. She wouldn't have the strength to move on. He thought she could never rebuild her life after everything that had happened. And with this in mind, he began to plan his revenge, not with violence, but with a subtle blow. The wedding would be perfect, but the ceremony wouldn't be complete without her presence. She shouldn't be there. She didn't deserve to be present on his day of glory. So, he thought of ways to make sure she failed, to make it so she had no option but to stay away, to leave her with no choices. The first step was emotional blackmail. He knew Clara always cared about the children, that she would do anything to protect what remained of their family. He tried through some subtle moves to make her believe that her presence at the ceremony could harm the children. He didn't need a formal excuse. All he needed was to plant the idea in her mind. You can't show up. You can't expose the kids to this. It's not the right time for them. But Clara didn't fall for it. She knew exactly what he was trying to do, and she didn't give in. The second step was public humiliation. He thought Clara wouldn't have the courage to show up even if she knew about the wedding. He believed she still saw him as someone important, someone who had control over her life. So, he used every tactic at his disposal to make sure she knew about the event in a subtle but effective way. He made sure the news reached her in the form of misplaced invitations, messages that could be seen from afar, but never directly. He wanted her to know he was getting married, but not too directly. He wanted her to know and perhaps to feel embarrassed, uncomfortable, incapable of showing up. Rodrigo imagined that by doing this, Clara would stay home, lamenting, feeling rejected once again. He thought she would be stuck in the past, unable to move on. He wanted her to see the wedding as a reminder of her own failure, a signal that she was no longer needed in his life. It was a perverse strategy based on his ego, but he believed it would be effective. But Clara, as always, was ahead of him. She knew exactly what he was trying to do, and contrary to what he imagined, she didn't feel humiliated nor rejected. She didn't care what he thought, or the games he was trying to play. Clara had already freed herself from that dynamic, no longer needing his approval or presence to be happy. She knew the true humiliation wasn't in her failure, but in Rodrigo's desperate attempt to make her fail. He didn't understand that her life no longer revolved around him. When the big day came, Rodrigo was certain she wouldn't show up. He imagined that somewhere in the city, she would be suffering from being left behind. He thought she would be home alone, and that her absence from the ceremony was the greatest victory he could achieve. But what he didn't know was that Clara Ara had already moved past all of that. She didn't need his permission nor his recognition. She wasn't there to cause a scene to destroy his day. She was there because it was her right, because she didn't need an apology, a recognition to feel complete. Clara appeared, not because he had planned her humiliation, but because she was no longer the woman he had left behind. She was there to show without saying a word that her life was elsewhere now, and Rodrigo, with all his arrogance and control, could no longer stop her from shining, from being who she always should have been. Clara Ara's true revenge was being happy without him. She was there to prove that even after the pain and humiliation, she had rebuilt her life, stronger and more whole than ever, and that more than any plan he had ever devised was the hardest blow Rodrigo could have received. Rodrigo was still trying to process the scene before him. The wedding he had dreamed of, the celebration he thought would be the greatest achievement of his life, was turning into a nightmare. Clara Ara's surprise entrance with the children was still hammering in his head. He looked at the boys trying to understand what was happening. They were there at the heart of the event, running and playing as if they owned the world. But who were they? Two boys smiling unaware of the stakes, with the lightness only a child could have. He looked at Clara, who was now talking with some of the guests, her children by her side. There was nothing dramatic about the scene. She wasn't shouting, wasn't drawing attention, didn't seem out for revenge. She was calm, serene, as if she had achieved what mattered most, inner peace. But for Rodrigo, the impact was devastating. He looked at the boys, trying to understand what they meant to him, to her, to their shared history. How had he not known about their existence? How had this happened without his knowledge? His ego tried to protect him, convincing him that it shouldn't matter. After all, he was there with his fiancée, Letitia, and he should focus on the future, not the past. But the presence of the boys stirred something in him that he couldn't ignore. What struck him the most was that although the boys were his image, he hadn't been a part of their lives. He didn't know them, hadn't helped them grow. He hadn't been the father they needed. Instead, he had distanced himself from Clara, from the family, without thinking about the consequences. He remembered the times he had been absent when she sought him out, trying to save their marriage, and he preferred to be somewhere else with other interests. Now, he saw the reflection of his choices in the eyes of those boys. The twins were innocent of it all. They were there playing, living their lives with the freedom and happiness Rodrigo had never known how to give. They didn't know the weight of the past, the pain of betrayal, the impact it had on their mother's life. They were there just to live in the moment, to be happy. But for Rodrigo, every smile they gave him felt like a painful reminder of what he had lost. And most painfully, of what he could never get back. He tried to look at Letitia, who was by his side, but she seemed unaware of the internal storm that was brewing inside him. She smiled, chatted with the guests, still unaware of the complexity of the situation. She didn't know the truth, didn't understand what Clara Ara represented to him, how much Rodrigo's past still haunted him. Rodrigo didn't know what to do with the overwhelming feeling he was experiencing. He wanted to ignore it, wanted to go on with the wedding, move forward, but he couldn't. The presence of Clarara's children, the calmness with which she handled the situation was a blow that was hard to bear. He tried to rationalize. She moved in, built a family, did it all on her own. But that only made him feel more insignificant. He, who had always thought he controlled his life, now found himself facing a reality he couldn't dominate. He looked once more at the boys. They were so at ease, so carefree, playing with the other children of the guests. And suddenly Rodrigo felt a sharp pain. He had lost the right to be part of that moment. He had lost the right to be a father to them. He was no longer someone who could intervene, correct, or participate in their lives. He had chosen the wrong path, and now he was paying the price for it. The sense of loss was overwhelming. He wanted to shout, wanted to question Clara Ara, ask why she hadn't told him about the children, but he knew there was no room for that anymore. Clara Ara's decision to move on without him had been final. She didn't need his permission or his approval. She had turned things around, and somehow that made Rodrigo feel small. The words he never said, the apologies he never asked for. The regret that was finally beginning to seep in everything consumed him. He didn't know how to make amends, how to win back what he should never have lost. The presence of Clara'ara's children wasn't just a reminder of what he had lost, but an evidence that time doesn't turn back. They were proof that he couldn't change the past, that the mistakes he had made couldn't be erased. He had lost the chance to be a part of their lives, and that more than anything else destroyed him from the inside. Rodrigo felt the weight of the onlookers' gazes on him. Each look seemed heavier than the last, and he couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was witnessing his failure. The guests, those he believed were friends and admirers, were all aware of the situation. Though no one dared to speak openly, he could feel the heavy silence that surrounded him. He tried to maintain his composure, tried to smile, to talk. But in his mind, the storm of emotions raged on. He kept glancing at Clara'ara, who was there with a tranquility that made him feel even smaller. She was in her own comfort zone, taking care of the children, interacting with the people around her, as if the world had righted itself without him, as if she needed nothing but herself. It was as if she had freed herself from everything he represented. Rodrigo felt exposed. The pride he had taken so long to build was shattering before him, before everyone. The woman he had discarded, the woman he had betrayed and humiliated, was there, stronger than ever, asking nothing from anyone, showing no resentment. She didn't need anything from him to shine as he tried to make sense of the situation. His eyes again turned to Clara's children. They were playing with the other guests with a happiness he had never known how to provide. They were like a constant reminder of what he had lost. Every laugh, every movement seemed like a cruel reminder that he was no longer part of that family, that he never had the right to be there. Clara'ara's gaze met his once more. There was no anger, no contempt, just a calmness he had never known how to recognize. It was as though she had accepted everything that had happened, and finally found peace, and that consumed him. He couldn't understand how she could be so calm after everything he'd done. Rodrigo searched for Letitia, trying to lean on her, trying to find some way to redeem himself. But she was too absorbed in the situation. She was beginning to understand what was truly happening, and the reality of her own position in Rodrigo's story seemed to be slowly taking shape. She looked at Clara'ara, looked at the children, and then her gaze met his full of confusion and unease. Rodrigo wished she didn't know the truth. He wanted Letitia to remain unaware of the past, for her to not know what he was trying so hard to hide. But there was no denying it anymore. The past was there in front of everyone, and Rodrigo could no longer escape his own story. He felt the embarrassment consume him, the heavy silence, the cautious glances. Everything made him feel like a spectator of his own life, with no control over what was happening around him. He was being publicly humiliated, not by Clara'ara's rage, but by the realization that he had lost everything that truly mattered. He had distanced himself from his family, betrayed Clara's trust, and now he saw her there with the children, with a life richer and more meaningful than anything he could offer. The real blow wasn't Clara showing up at the wedding. It wasn't her causing a scene or seeking revenge. The blow was in her simple presence. She was there with a look of peace and dignity, showing everyone that she had overcome the pain, that she didn't need Rodrigo's approval. She wasn't there to destroy the wedding. She was there because, unlike him, she had already rebuilt herself. And the lesson was clear. Rodrigo didn't know how to act anymore. He couldn't control his emotions. He couldn't stop the suffocating weight of humiliation. He who had always sought to be the strong man, the center of attention, was now in the position of someone who felt completely powerless. He looked at Clara'ara and her children, and the feeling of loss consumed him even more. He could no longer escape the reality that no matter how much he tried to justify himself, the truth was there, naked and raw. He had failed, and everyone knew it. Rodrigo watched Clara'ara with a mixture of rage and regret that consumed him. He tried to ignore it, tried to focus on Letitia, but he couldn't tear his gaze away from the woman he had lost. She was there with absolute calm, talking to the guests as if nothing had happened, as if the entire past between them was irrelevant. But it wasn't. For him, it still hurt, still marked him. Every gesture from Clara, every glance seemed like another reminder that he had failed, that he hadn't valued what truly mattered. Her presence in the midst of the ceremony made everything even clearer. Clara'ara wasn't there for revenge. She wasn't there to cause a scene or disrupt what Rodrigo believed to be his great achievement. She was there because she had already moved past the past, because she had found the peace and strength to move forward. She had rebuilt her life, made her way, and raised her children without his help, and that tore him apart inside. Rodrigo wanted Clara'ara to be different. He wanted her to be the fragile woman he always imagined, someone who didn't have the strength to carry on without him. He thought she would never be able to rebuild her life, that after everything that had happened, she would never be happy. But what he saw before him was completely different. Clara was serene, strong, and fulfilled. And he, the man who had once destroyed her, was there helpless, not knowing what to do with the pain he felt. He tried to understand where he had gone wrong, where he had failed so terribly. He thought back to the times when instead of drawing closer, he pushed her away. When she needed support, he left her alone. When she trusted him, he betrayed her. But now, seeing Clara with the children, seeing the pride she radiated, Rodrigo could no longer deny that the failure was his, that the mistake had been his all along. He had lost the woman who deep down mattered the most. He had everything and hadn't recognized it. Clara's gaze met his again, and something changed. There was no anger, no vengeance, only a look of understanding and dignity. She knew he was suffering, knew he was aware of the pain he felt, but she had nothing more to give. There was no more space for him in her life. What she had done for herself no longer depended on his presence, and that more than anything else destroyed Rodrigo. She didn't need him. She had moved on, and there was no longer room for the mistakes of the past. Rodrigo tried to convince himself that at least he was with Leticia. She was young, beautiful, and he could still try to build something with her. But the truth was clear. The emptiness he felt could not be filled by anyone else. He realized at that moment that what he truly wanted wasn't with Leticia. What he longed for was the chance to rebuild what he had destroyed with Clara. But that opportunity no longer existed. The weight of the loss was overwhelming. He wanted to apologize, wanted a chance to fix everything he had done. But he knew it was too late. Clara no longer needed him. She didn't need an apology to be happy. She had already found her happiness without him, and that was a pain he could not bear. He, who believed he was the center of the world, now found himself on the outskirts of his own story. The woman he had despised, whom he had betrayed, was now stronger than ever, and deep down he knew he could never reach her again. The truth hit him like a sharp blow. He had lost the best part of his life, the woman who should have always been his partner, his family. He looked at her children now, understanding that they were the proof of everything he had never been. They were the reflection of a life he hadn't known how to build, a life he would never have. And in the end, that realization was more painful than any humiliation he had ever suffered. He had lost the woman who mattered most. And there she was with her new family, with a life built on strength and dignity. He could only watch, powerless, as the pain consumed him slowly. Rodrigo watched the twins with a mix of disbelief and pain. They ran back and forth, smiling, playing with the other children, unaware of what was happening around them. The purity of their actions, the joy radiating from them, seemed to sharply contrast with the emptiness Rodrigo felt. Those boys were his image, yet he didn't know them. They were living proof of something he had lost, something he never thought he could lose. He watched them trying to understand the pain he felt. The pain of knowing they were there in front of him with Clara, and he wasn't part of their lives. He hadn't been the father they needed. They didn't need him. Clara had played her role alone as she always had, and now he was a stranger to her children. He found himself powerless, without the right to be what they needed, without the right to be a father to them. The boys were completely at ease interacting with the other guests, while Rodrigo felt like a distant figure, someone who didn't belong in that moment, someone who didn't deserve to be there. He tried to approach one of the boys, but something inside stopped him. He knew he had no right. He knew his place was in the past, far from that moment, far from the family he should never have abandoned. Clara, who was standing off in the distance, looked at him with a calm gaze, as if she knew exactly what he was feeling. She didn't scold him, didn't judge him. She simply watched him as if understanding that his pain was the price of the choices he had made. She didn't need his validation anymore. She had already built her life without him, and the children running beside her were living proof that she didn't need him to be happy. Rodrigo felt a weight on his chest as he realized the twins were in fact a reflection of his own failure. They weren't just Clara's children. They were the consequence of his wrong choices. He had always thought he could turn back time, that he could fix things. But it was clear now that there was no more time for that. He had lost the right to be a part of Clara's life. And now the boys were the reminder that no matter how hard he fought against it, time could never be reclaimed. He tried to approach once more, but Clara, with a simple gesture, stopped him. She didn't need to say anything. Her gaze, serene but firm, made it clear that he no longer had a place there. She knew he was beginning to understand what he had lost. There was no need for explanations. The truth was plain. She had moved on, and he had been left behind. The twins continued touring and play, immune to the drama unfolding around them. They knew nothing of betrayal, abandonment, or the pain Rodrigo was feeling. They simply lived in the moment, innocent, free, without the weight of the past. And that, in some ways, was what hurt Rodrigo the most. He watched them with a silent affection, but he knew he would never be more than a distant memory to them. They were happy without him, and now he had to accept that he no longer had the right to be present in their lives. The sadness settled deeper into his heart. He didn't know how to explain the pain of seeing Clarara's children, two boys who could have been his, but now were part of another story. He felt like a spectator, watching something he couldn't change, something he could no longer reach. What he had lost stood before him, and there was no going back. The consequences of his mistakes, the choices he had made were right there, embodied in those two carefree boys, unaware that the man watching them was the very one responsible for the distance between them. The silence took over the ceremony as Clara approached Rodrigo, her steps soft but firm. She wasn't there to cause a scandal, nor to shout or accuse. She was there to show him that, finally, she had moved beyond everything he had done. The woman he thought was weak, the one he believed would never be able to move on, was now standing before him, stronger than he had ever imagined. Rodrigo, as if waking from a nightmare, turned to face her, but his gaze was no longer the same. There was no longer anger or resentment in her eyes, only a silent peace that left him speechless. Clara looked at him with the calmness of someone who had nothing more to prove. She wasn't there to justify her choices or talk about the mistakes of the past. She didn't need to do any of that. What she had accomplished already spoke for itself. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice trying to hide his nervousness. But Clara didn't respond with words. She simply looked at him as if analyzing them and he had become. She knew what he was feeling, knew that he was struggling with shame and regret, but she didn't let herself be swayed by it. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need him to feel better. "I left because you couldn't see me for who I truly was," Clara said, her voice calm, but carrying a heavy, silent weight. The words fell like a stone on Rodrigo's chest. He had tried to deny it, tried to justify it, but now there was no escaping. He knew she was right. He had never seen her, never understood what she meant in his life until it was too late. Clara's words weren't an attack. They weren't an accusation. She wasn't there for revenge. She was just speaking the truth, a truth that Rodrigo had always known but had refused to face. She looked at him with the serenity of someone who no longer held a grudge, someone who had forgiven, but at the same time would never forget. She didn't need his forgiveness nor his approval. She had moved on because forgiveness didn't come from him. She had already found peace within herself. Rodrigo felt a sharp pain, the pain of realizing that even after everything he had done, Clara no longer carried the bitterness. She had freed herself while he was still trapped under the weight of his own mistakes. His pain no longer came from the loss of Clara, but from the realization that he would never be able to recover what he had destroyed. Time didn't go backward. The choices he made couldn't be undone. And what hurt him the most was that for Clara, he no longer meant anything. She didn't care about the resentment. She no longer needed his pain or his apologies. She had freed herself from him. And that more than anything else tore him apart. She wasn't there to remind him of what he had done, but to show that her life without him had been richer, more meaningful than he had ever imagined. Clara had become the woman he never knew how to recognize, the woman he never deserved. Clara's gaze wasn't one of hate. It wasn't one of revenge. It was the gaze of someone who had finally found her place in the world without needing anyone to validate her. She was there, not to cause pain, but to show that despite everything, she had won. She no longer needed Rodrigo, nor his validation. She was whole, and that was the greatest humiliation Rodrigo could suffer. In silence, Rodrigo realized the great truth. He had never seen her, and now he would never have the chance to see who she truly was. She'd moved on while he remained stuck in the past, trying to deal with the pain of a loss that deep down he knew he deserved. The truth was there in front of him, and he had to face it. Clara no longer cared about the resentment. She was at peace, and that destroyed him from within. Rodrigo was still trying to process everything happening around him, but Clara's words echoed in his mind, cutting through his defenses. He thought she had moved on. He thought she had left the past behind, that the pain had faded and somehow she had forgotten him. But now looking at her, something told him he was wrong. Clara wasn't there for revenge, to demand any sort of retribution or explanation. She was there because in her life she didn't need him to be whole. But there was something he didn't understand. She was there with the children with a strong presence, but without anger, without bitterness. And this made him question, what else didn't he know? How had she come this far? She wasn't there to hurt him, but to show him that despite everything, there was something he had never seen in his life. Something he had never been able to see while he was focused only on his own shortcomings. Rodrigo remained silent, his mind trying to comprehend what he was seeing, hearing, and feeling. It was a mix of pain and disbelief. He was there surrounded by the celebration, but he felt like he was in a completely isolated place. Clara wasn't looking at him with anger. She was looking at him with the serenity of someone who had finally found what she had always needed. But without him, the twist for Rodrigo wasn't the fact that Clara had returned to this moment. It wasn't the fact that she had brought her children to the ceremony. The real twist was that deep down he knew Clara wasn't there for him. She didn't want anything more from him. What he feared was the truth. She was living a truth he'd refused to accept. She no longer needed him. Clara, with all her strength and calm, didn't need his approval. She had freed herself from the pain, the anger, the shame, and the entire dark past. She was no longer seeking answers because she had already given herself the answers she needed. The love she once had for him no longer existed. What remained was a woman who, despite everything, continued to live her life with dignity, with her children, with her inner peace. Rodrigo, in turn, felt a very different kind of pain. He wasn't just mourning the loss of Clara, he was mourning everything he hadn't been able to see while he was with her. The woman he thought was weak, the woman he betrayed, the woman he abandoned was now standing before him, stronger than ever. He was finally seeing the reflection of what he should have recognized in the past. She had always been stronger than he had imagined, and no matter how hard he tried to seek redemption, he knew she didn't need him to feel complete. Clara was there not because of him, but because of herself. She didn't need his validation nor his forgiveness to be happy. She had overcome everything, and he who thought he always controlled his life now found himself powerless before this woman who had done everything on her own without his help, without his support. The real twist for Rodrigo, and perhaps for everyone else present, was that Clara had already written her own story. She didn't need anything more. She didn't need him to see what she had become. She was there with her children, and what mattered most was the life she had created for herself. She was no longer involved in a past Hestel carried with him. She was free, and that more than anything was the final blow. Rodrigo didn't know how to react. What he wanted now wasn't forgiveness, wasn't a chance to turn back time, but the acknowledgement that he had lost the greatest opportunity of his life. Clara's love was no longer within his reach. What he hadn't seen before, what he didn't understand while he was with her, was now before him in its clearest form. The love he lost was not something that could be reclaimed. He had failed to see the woman Clara had always been, and in the end, he knew that this no longer mattered to her. She had found something much more precious than the love he thought was enough. She'd found her own peace. Rodrigo's wedding, which was supposed to be the pinnacle of his life, now felt like a reflection of his own failure. He had meticulously planned every detail, imagining that everything would fall into place, that he would finally gain the approval of all, that his past would be left behind. But deep down, he knew that Clara's presence there with her children, with the peace she radiated, was ruining everything he thought he had achieved. He looked at her with her children, and couldn't help but notice that while he was there, surrounded by a party he believed was his victory, she had already lived her true triumph. She didn't need his permission nor his forgiveness. She had become a woman he never imagined was possible, and that more than anything made him question what really matters in life. Clara wasn't there to destroy the wedding. She wasn't there to cause pain or suffering. She was there to show everyone without a single word, without a single aggressive gesture, that true power doesn't lie in revenge, but in the strength to move forward. She hadn't allowed herself to be defined by betrayal or the pain of the past. She had risen, grown, and now she was someone Rodrigo didn't recognize, someone he didn't deserve. What Clara had done wasn't a low blow, but a silent lesson, and Rodrigo could no longer ignore it. He desperately wished for time to rewind, for a chance to correct his mistakes, to be the man Clara deserved. But he knew that wasn't possible. What he had before him wasn't a second chance, but the weight of past choices. The weight of a truth he had always known, but refused to see. He was no longer a part of her life, and the most painful part was that he couldn't change that anymore. He couldn't go back, couldn't win Clara back. She had distanced herself from him, and their reason was simple. He had never truly seen her for who she was. He underestimated her, treated her as dispensable, and now she was there, more complete and happier than he would ever be. Rodrigo knew that although he was surrounded by people, he was alone. He had lost the best part of his life, the woman he despised, and now he was there with Letitia, with his friends, but unable to shake the feeling that everything was wrong. He felt empty, lost, unable to find any value in what he had built. He knew that in his pursuit of status, of external validation, he had lost what really mattered. Clara no longer needed his presence nor his approval. She was there to show herself and everyone that true strength doesn't come from defeating others, but from being true to oneself, from moving forward, from not allowing the past to define who you are. She was there to show that even after the pain, the betrayal, and the abandonment, it's possible to start over. She was there to be the woman he had never known how to see, but that now he finally recognized. And in the end, the lesson Rodrigo had to learn painfully was that his greatest mistake in life wasn't just betraying Clara, but not seeing the value she had, the value he lost. She didn't need him, but he needed her. And the great irony was that he only realized this when it was too late. The past, with all its flaws and regrets, could no longer be changed. And all he could do now was watch Clara with her children, with the dignity and peace he should have always recognized. Clara's true strength was in her ability to move on, to never depend on the one who betrayed her. She was proof that even after the greatest humiliations, it is possible to rebuild, to rise again, and to find a happy ending, but not with someone who left you behind. Her ending was already written, and it was an ending of success, self-sufficiency, and silent redemption. And Rodrigo finally understood that he couldn't be a part of it. She had distanced herself from his life, and he unknowingly had let her go. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our